Okay, we're back again, and we're going to get into the Glass Bead Game Society. Again, I mentioned that we have 220 members now. Um, so I'm going to start at the top again and start going through all the names and their significance to the Glass Bead Game Society. Um, all of these members have special significance, being members of the glass bead game, because they've attained immortality in a sense, that their ideas and their lives had a lasting impression. Some of these people go back to 500 BC, 200 years ago, 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, and their lives and their ideas were so unique and beautiful that they attained immortality, similar to how Achilles or Achilles believed that you attained immortality by doing something great. So, of the 50 billion people that have lived, uh, only 220 are in the glass bead game currently, that have this special significance and immortality in effect, um, because their ideas were so profound and beautiful and great and important. So I guess you could say that many of the others did not have significance. They did in their own lives or whatever, but they came and gone, and it's like they weren't even here because they didn't leave anything of significance. Some did, to a lesser degree, maybe in their importance to their families or whatever, but to all of mankind and immortality and history, really these 220 people have special significance. So just starting at the top again, the idealist, Plato had his theory of forms, that transcended perceived reality. And within the theory of forms, uh, this was a perfect state of being, um, that the human mind could not conceive of. And in metaphysics of being, we talked about imperfections of mathematics and perception, and all of these things are really infinitely far away from what true reality is. But we take this grand approximation as being the reality that we live in, the real world which we live in, and it's this imperfect world. So Plato has obviously special significance. Jump on to the second one, Parmenides. Uh, Plato wrote about him. I'm not sure if Parmenides wrote things himself, or if they survived. Zeno, interesting enough, was his teacher, mentor, was Parmenides' mentor. Socrates was Plato's mentor. And then Plato was Aristotle's mentor. And Aristotle was Alexander the Great's mentor. So that's kind of interesting. Parmenides, his idea of uh, the oneness of being, being itself, and this is a recent quote that I've seen that I really liked, was that being itself is the only true nature to reality. Everything else is an illusion and unimportant. He believed in the elusiveness of being, that it was undefinable, transcendent, unchanging, which is interesting. It kind of ties, in my mind, to this idea of, we'll get into all these guys, this idea of losing the self, possibly upon death, attaining that state of perfection where pure being or non-being is attained, where there are no imperfections. So Parmenides is very unique, almost a form of insanity, maybe, from the real world that we live in, because everything has to be discrete, point A to B, real, tangible, and that's the world that we live in. Parmenides and Plato's Parmenides viewed this transcendent, perfect existence that transcended all of that and was completely beyond human conception. Our limited minds could never conceive of an infinite state of being, an infinite nothingness of the perfect state of being. So this is all very radical and crazy, but we'll just keep plowing along. Moving on to the third idealist, F.H. Bradley, wrote Appearance and Reality, believed in absolute truth without paradox, attempted to write about that, and his Appearance and Reality, it's very hard to write about perfection and absolute truth, given that we live in a world of paradox and limited nature, and everything is relative. So an absolute nature would not have any truth relative to anything else. So F.H. Bradley was very important in metaphysics of being, and is in the glass bead game, attempted to write about it, about this absolute truth and perfection. But again, going back to what Plato and Parmenides said, you really can't define it. So it's even beyond what F.H. Bradley wrote about. Moving on to the fourth one here, we got Heraclitus, talked about eternal change, eternal flux. I believe he lived around 500 BC. It's really amazing that he lived that long ago, and his ideas are still so profound today. Again, that's that state of immortality. Again, this eternal change, eternal flux, leads to the elusiveness of reality and being, that it needs to be in a perpetual state of change. And really, our existence is in a perpetual state of change. Every moment is different, whether you consider it discrete or continuous. The one truth really is that there is eternal change, and that leads to the elusiveness. It can never be stagnant, can never be defined. And really, all of this stuff evolves around ontology, the nature of being. So when I say stuff and whatever, I'm always talking about this highest level of being that can be talked about, defined, or speculated about. The next one is Zenos Paradoxes, the Achilles Paradox, that you cannot catch a moving object due to an infinite regress, or I guess because you have to travel one half the distance before you get to your final destination, or that the moving object, the leading moving object, has moved ever so slightly forward by the time the trailing object gets to the leading object's prior location. That's the best definition of that. So how do we catch moving objects faster? Achilles, how does he catch a tortoise? It's because the world we live in is discrete, and you just hop over all these little infinities along the way, and that's the world we live in. So it is a paradox, and if you really dig into that, it's just amazing. That was in Metaphysics of Being. Pretty much it's been in all the books. Metaphysics of Being, House on the Hill, the Ontology Dialogues, and Being in Time. The other paradoxes, the Stadium Paradox, talks about the discreteness of reality. How does, if reality is discrete, how do you get from point A to B? What's in between point A and B? Nothing. So it's a simultaneous transfer to the point A and B if reality is only discrete. So that's just crazy, and you can't really explain it away. Mathematicians to this day really haven't explained away Zenos paradoxes. Adolf Grunbaum, Wesley Salmon, Joseph Mazur, and others may think that they have explained it away, but it really isn't explained away at all, because in calculus you can only approach a limit. You never actually can define that final destination due to an infinite regress. So the other paradoxes were the arrow paradox. How can a moving object at any given point in time be motionless? And the other one I'm drawing a blank on, which is amazing, Achilles. How do you ever get to a unmoving location? Yeah, because you always have to travel half of the remaining distance. So that's also a paradox, and due to an infinite regress, motion's impossible. But again, the world that we live in is discrete, so you just jump over all the little infinities. And then the last paradox, he actually had about 40 of them, but I don't think many of the other ones are known. The other significant one was the paradox of place, and I like to think of this as what is the universe sitting in? It must be sitting in a place. What is its foundation? And there is no foundation, because that last level, there's just nothing. It just goes on forever. So basically the universe is sitting in nothing. It's just this undefined paradox again. Moving on to the next one, Anaxagoras stated that everything is in everything. Again, he was back in 300 or 500 BC, and that is such an important statement because if you think of a hologram where every piece of a hologram has the entirety of the entire image within it, and that's how a hologram is built. And then you could tie this to DNA. Every cell, DNA or whatever, has the mapping for the entire body and so forth. And there's other examples of these. I can't really think of them, but just everything is in everything. And when you really dig into all these mathematical paradoxes and how infinity merges with zero, and how a finite set can contain an infinite number of members, this whole everything is in everything kind of concept kind of makes sense in a weird way. All right, moving on to the next one. Andre Gregory, who was in My Dinner with Andre. He was a playwright. I got him in The Idealists. Very important, probably the best movie ever made, in my opinion. Talked about sanctuaries of light, pockets of light within the darkness of human existence. There's just so many things that he talks about. He talks with Wally, and Wally thinks he's insane, and Andre's always attaining these godlike experiences and all the little quests he goes on and so forth, and Wally just thinks he's crazy for even thinking like that and talking like that. And I just find a lot of humor in the movie, and um, it's my favorite movie of all time. Next guy, Friedrich Nietzsche, talked about Overman, will to power. Um, he believed in eternal recurrence, that you would always have another chance to progress in this life. Wrote Zarathustra, which talked about this perfect existence, and the last 13 years of his life he lived in insanity, and I've joked that he just went off into a different place that wasn't really insane. I don't know that much about his life, but the whole concept of Overman and attaining this perfect existence, and that's what we have here in the glass bead game, if you can call it this. So Friedrich Nietzsche, one of the idealists. Next guy, Immanuel Kant. This statement, space and time are human constructs, and this is the foundation of surrealism. I never really thought of it or read it that way before, but I saw this recently. Critique of Pure Reason, very hard to read, really lays out his argument, and I've done several videos on his four antinomies and the paradoxes, and he believed these are real paradoxes of, is the universe composed of simple parts, or is there no foundation to the universe? I believe there's no foundation to it, and no ultimate meaning or purpose to the universe. We assign meaning to it. And then his other antinomies on space and time, and does God exist? And it's hard to remember everything because there's so many members of the glass bead game and guys, but and I do these videos without notes per se. So anyways, Immanuel Kant, again talking about the transcendence of ultimate truth, and it could never be conceived or perceived by a human mind. And Ayn Rand hated Immanuel Kant for this reason, that she believed that you could understand it. A is A, and we'll get into her more. But I'm starting to appreciate more of the Immanuel Kant and his ideas, and even though he's very hard to read, but I'm slowly starting to understand him better. Rene Descartes believed in a dualism, came up with I think, therefore I am, which is critically important. That's almost a solipsistic view, not quite. Believed in dualism. It's an idealistic type of view. That's the only thing he could prove, is that since he had a thought, that he had his existence. But also his dualism believed that there was matter that had extension, could perish, was divisible, and all of that. And then there was the mind and the soul, which has no extension, was eternal, and was not divisible. So this is really interesting when you get into all that. Then getting into Gottfried Leibniz, I've been reading more of him recently, his monads and his metaphysics, and again, his monads were extensionless units of being that were unique. And Leibniz is definitely one of the top guys of all time, and a first lieutenant in the uh, in the glass bead game, and so are all these first 10 guys or so that I've mentioned. Oh, I was thinking I was going to rank some of these guys. Are they tens, nines, fives on a scale of 1 to 10? Their importance currently in the glass bead game, and probably all the ones that I've said for so far are probably all nines and tens because they're so important to the glass bead game. Who else? George Berkeley next. Again, he's a 10. To be perceived. This year is the 400th anniversary to his writing Helios, and I can't remember the name. I've got a mental block right now. Um, but his thoughts on idealism, and he was really far out there, but he believed everything was in the mind, that there was no external reality, nature to reality at all. Everything was illusion and Maya. Everything was in the mind. If you really get into that, um, it there's a lot of truth to it. That nothing can exist outside of the mind. So let me stop on that. We're at 21 minutes, so this would be the Glass Bead Game Society Video 2.